The story begins on a cold March night in 1922 in a quiet corner of rural Bavaria, Germany. Hinterkaifeck was not even a real village, just the name of a small farmstead sitting in isolation, about an hour's walk from the nearest town of Gribern. To this day, what happened on that farm remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in European criminal history. A family of 6, along with their maid, would meet a fate so gruesome, so incomprehensible, that investigators struggled to piece together the motive or the killer. What makes the case even more haunting is that the murderer didn't simply kill and flee. Evidence suggests he may have lived in the house with the corpses for days, eating their food, tending their animals, and moving about undisturbed before vanishing forever. The Gruber family who lived there were not strangers in their community. Andreas Gruber, the head of the family, was 63 years old, a strict, often disliked man with a reputation for being harsh and difficult. His wife Cecilia was 72, known to be quieter but equally unwelcoming to outsiders. Living with them was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35 years old, who was raising her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Rounding out the household was their new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had only just arrived that very day to begin her employment. She could never have guessed her first night in the house would also be her last. The Gruber farm was already the subject of local gossip before the killings. People whispered about the strange relationship between Andreas and his daughter Victoria. Rumors of incest circulated, and it was known that Andreas had even served time in prison for it. Whether those allegations continued in secret afterward was unclear, but it painted an unsettling picture of the household. On top of this, Victoria was a widow whose husband had reportedly died in World War I, yet many suspected he may have returned and lived under a false identity, fueling strange theories later when the massacre became headline news. In the days leading up to the murders, a series of bizarre incidents set the stage for what was to come. Andreas Gruber confided to neighbors that he had found footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the woods directly up to the farm, but none leading back. It seemed someone had approached the house, circled it, and then never left. Doors and locks were reported to be strangely damaged. The family heard footsteps in the attic at night, yet when Andreas searched, he found no one. A set of house keys went missing. Even Victoria had told her friends she feared something was wrong, that they were being watched. By March 31, 1922, the farm was filled with tension. That afternoon, the maid Maria arrived, escorted by her sister. They had a brief chat in the doorway, and Maria's sister later said she felt uneasy leaving her sibling there. She could not explain why. That night, the killer struck. The murders themselves were savage. Each victim was slaughtered with a mattock, a heavy farming tool similar to a pickaxe. Based on the investigation, the killer lured or drove the victims one by one into the barn, where Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and little Cecilia the granddaughter were killed. Young Cecilia, only 7 years old, had clumps of her own hair torn out, suggesting she remained alive long enough to witness the horror and die in terror. The bodies were stacked and partially covered with hay. Inside the house, 2-year-old Joseph was murdered in his crib, and the maid Maria was killed in her bed, still wearing her work clothes from her first and last day. What followed was stranger still. The killer did not flee immediately. Neighbors reported that for several days after the family was last seen, Smoke rose from the chimney of the farmhouse. The farm animals were fed and cared for, the cows milked, and the dog let loose. Bread and meat were eaten from the kitchen, yet no one answered the door when neighbors visited. Finally, days later, concerned villagers went inside and uncovered the carnage. The crime scene baffled investigators. The brutality was shocking, but the eerie calm of the farm afterward suggested someone had deliberately stayed there. Was it to hide, to stage the scene, or simply because the killer felt at home? Over 100 suspects were eventually questioned, ranging from neighbors to soldiers to wandering vagrants. No one was ever charged. The theories that emerged were numerous and disturbing. Some believed it was a family member. Others thought it was a disgruntled lover, perhaps someone angry at Victoria. Another theory suggested robbery, but valuables remained untouched. Many suspected it was someone close to the farm, because the layout of the barns and buildings meant the killer seemed to know exactly where to go. The incest rumors and Victoria's troubled relationships fueled gossip that perhaps the father of her child Joseph had played a role. The fact that Joseph's paternity was disputed added to the mystery. Some said he was the son of Victoria's late husband. Others whispered he was the product of her father's abuse. A local man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, once romantically linked to Victoria, even confessed he might be Joseph's father. He was investigated thoroughly, but nothing could be proven. The crime drew massive attention. Newspapers across Germany and beyond reported on it, amplifying the rumors and spreading fear. The idea that the murderer could have been a neighbor, a family member, or even a stranger lurking in the attic captured public imagination. The fact that police could not solve it, despite interviewing over 100 suspects and reinvestigating years later, only deepened the mystery. Some even believed the killer's identity was known but covered up due to the scandal it would cause. But at the core of the tragedy lay 6 brutal deaths, cut down in a place meant to be safe. The farmstead, surrounded by quiet woods and fields, became a symbol of terror. To this day, people ask how someone could kill, then calmly live among the corpses as if nothing had happened. That single detail makes the Hinterkaifeck case one of the most haunting in true crime history. When the villagers entered the Gruber farmhouse after days of silence, the horror they uncovered was almost beyond words. The barn was dark and cold, but as they lifted the hay, they saw Andreas, his wife, his daughter, and his granddaughter lying together, battered beyond recognition. Each blow had been delivered with precision, as though the killer knew exactly how to strike to end life quickly. But the cruelty was most evident in little Chiselia, whose torn hair suggested she had struggled and suffered before her death. Inside, the scene was just as chilling. 2-year-old Joseph was found lifeless in his crib, covered with one of his mother's skirts. The new maid Maria lay on her bed, her skull crushed. Her luggage was still beside her, barely unpacked. It was as if she had walked into a nightmare she did not belong to. Yet what stood out most was not only the murders but what followed. The kitchen stove had been used. The bread box was missing loaves. The animals were tended as though life went on as normal. The cows had been milked, the pigs fed. Even the dog was cared for. This suggested a killer who was calm, methodical, and unafraid of discovery. It also meant they felt comfortable enough in the farmhouse to stay for days. Police were summoned from Munich, and the investigation quickly turned chaotic. The crime scene was trampled by curious villagers, destroying evidence. Items were moved, bodies mishandled, and fingerprints smudged. What might have been crucial clues were lost forever in those early hours. Still, investigators pieced together what they could. There were no signs of forced entry. The killer likely used familiarity or trickery to lure the family into the barn. Each was slaughtered one at a time, suggesting patience and control. No valuables were taken, which ruled out robbery. The presence of the missing keys and the strange noises in the attic before the murders fueled theories that the killer had already been hiding in the house for days, watching and waiting. Attention soon turned to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who had once courted Victoria. Many believed he was Joseph's father. He was among the first to enter the farmhouse after the murders, and was accused of acting suspiciously, even opening doors without hesitation, as if he already knew the layout. Some thought he was too calm, too collected. Yet despite interrogations, no solid evidence tied him to the crime. Others suspected a wandering stranger, perhaps a vagrant or escaped prisoner. But how would such a person know the routines of the family, or have the boldness to stay afterward without fear? The idea seemed unlikely. Instead, suspicion kept circling back to people close to the Grubers. Neighbors, former workers, and even relatives were questioned. More than 100 people in total were investigated, but every lead collapsed into speculation. The more investigators searched, the more the mystery deepened. The killings were brutal, yet deliberate. The aftermath was calculated, yet unnerving. Whoever did it seemed to vanish into thin air,